So understanding vaccine antigen and how it might help you talk to your vet about your vaccine concerns. So this is a little bit more about vaccine doses and how they always say the antigen should be the same for each animal. So Big Pharma says that each animal should get the same amount of antigen specifically in their vaccine no matter what, which sounds reasonable at first because their argument is whether you have a tiny dog or a big dog, if they encounter a raccoon or bat or something in the woods, that animal, distemper, any virus, is going to be shedding the same amount of antigen and stuff regardless of the size of your dog. So the vaccine should have the same size amount of antigen in them all, is what they say. So, okay, maybe that sounds okay at first, but that 5-pound dog still has 40 times less blood and lymph and immune system to deal with that wild virus. So he's still getting way more than the bigger dog. Then the bigger dog, on the other hand, especially if they have a long snout like a German Shepherd or a Labrador or a Golden Retriever, they've got so much space in their nasal passages and turbinates and sinuses that they're going to inhale even more of whatever virus is out there. So I don't think that argument works. But I don't think that's what most of us are concerned about, okay? So this video stems from a Facebook video. I had my other video about our vaccines one size fits all. A pharmaceutical veterinarian made a comment on there. And first I want to say, she was polite and direct and not combative or insulting or anything. It seemed like somebody that you could have a conversation with. So that was nice, and I applaud that because, as we know, a lot of vets are pretty combative or coercive or won't discuss vaccines with you. So that was nice. But even with her being polite, trying to actually educate, she still made it all about the antigen, not the total amount of vaccine. So modern Western medicine for human doctors and veterinarians were misled on this on purpose by Big Pharma. So we, as pet owners and people like you, are concerned about the entire amount of stuff that's in the vaccine vial. But Big Pharma tries to downplay your concerns and kind of misdirect because they just discussed the antigen content in the vial. So what is antigen content? What does that mean? We're taught in vet school and medical school when it comes to vaccines that there's 2 or 3 parts. There's antigen, adjuvant, and then the preservative. So the antigen is the actual bits and pieces of virus or bacteria that we're trying to get the immune system to recognize and respond to. That's the whole concept of vaccines, that if you put some bits and pieces of the virus in there and inject them in the body, then the immune system will recognize it, and then later in the future, when you're in the wild and exposed to some big high exposure of that virus, your immune system will already know what it looks like and have memory cells and antibodies to fight it. That's the concept. But we have to break down the virus into such tiny pieces before we inject it in the body in the vaccine, because if not, you'll make the animal sick with the virus. So that's the antigen. The antigen is the part of the virus that's in the vaccine that we're trying to create a reaction to. Now, the second part is the adjuvant. The adjuvant is the other toxic stuff that we have to put in there. Because I already said, we have to dilute down the virus so much that the immune system doesn't recognize it and doesn't form a reaction to it. So the adjuvants are the other things that we have to put in there that are toxic enough and reactive enough to get the immune system to react. So that's your heavy metals and your mercury and your aluminum and your things like that you're worried about. And what modern Western medicine doesn't talk about is that once you do that, you're not only building antibodies and a reaction to the virus component, you're building a reaction to the heavy metals and preservatives and all the chemicals that were in the vaccine also. And then the preservative is just a dose of antibiotic, which is to prevent bacterial contamination of the vial. But what do I say about bacteria and no waste in nature? If you're concerned about bacteria, it's because you know there's something dead or dying or decaying in the vaccine that the bacteria are going to want to come in and clean up. Well, of course there is. It's attenuated or muted or little tiny pieces of the virus they're trying to get the immune system to respond to. Well, yeah, bacteria naturally is going to want to try to come clean that up. So they put a dose of antibiotic in the vial. Well, it's the same amount of antibiotic regardless of the size of animal. So your 5-pound Chihuahua is getting 40 times the dose of antibiotic in that vial than your 200-pound Mastiff that I always talk about. But here's the problem. The vet industry, the focus and conversation is always on the antigen, that one piece of the vaccine that's the antigen. That's why I think so many veterinarians are confused by your concern. You need to talk to them about heavy metals and adjuvants and all, but what we're really concerned about is the volume of adjuvant and preservative and chemical reagents and solvents, and who knows what else is in there. That's what we're concerned about. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that I feel like, in my observation and my experience, that when I see an actual reaction to the virus or antigen part of the vaccine, I feel like I see that more in medium and large dogs than small dogs. When this happens with the rabies vaccine, we call it rabies miasm, when they have like some symptoms of rabies. And I feel like I see that more in big dogs than little dogs. Or maybe it's just more noticeable and concerning in big dogs. I don't know. But I think what causes the problems in the smaller dogs that we tend to be more worried about with our vaccine doses is the volume of the vaccine. That's what we're always talking about. I think we see problems with all the other stuff in the volume of vaccine in these smaller dogs, whether it's immediately after the vaccine or next day or years later. And we've discussed that in other places. So while most vets are going to seem combative on this subject, I think it may be because we're a communication breakdown. We're talking about literally two different things. So the vet's going to argue all the time that the animals need the same amount of antigen, which I'm not convinced of. But I think the problem is terminology. The way the veterinarian uses the term antigen and vaccine almost interchangeably. I mean, they know better when they're sitting in front of a textbook in school, but out in the real world in the vet clinic, the words vaccine and antigen kind of become very interchangeable in their usage. And that's partially because Big Pharma has convinced your vet that all the other stuff in the vaccine besides the antigen is just inert or benign, or it's just nothing to even talk about or be concerned about, be worried about. There's no way the mercury and aluminum and preservatives and all that, there's no way that stuff's hurting these animals. We don't need to be worried about that. These people are crazy. It's the antigen is what it's all about, and all animals need the same amount of antigen, which again, I'm not sure about that. So this may help you in your conversation with your veterinarian if you tell them you're not questioning the amount of antigen, because that's what they've been taught and programmed to say, antigen, antigen, antigen. Tell them, look, I'm not really worried about the amount of antigen right now. That's a concern, but it's not my primary concern. My primary concern is the volume of other stuff, heavy metals, solvents, chemicals, preservatives, in that one-size-fits-all vial, because that's the part that we talk about all the time, that 5-pound dog is literally getting 40 times the amount of all that stuff than the 200-pound dog. More about this and things like this in my book, Why Our Pets Are Unhealthy, available on Amazon. Thank you.